So we want to talk about hypocrites. Is that how we want to start this thing?
Gosh.
Hey, this is the perfect group for a discussion on hypocrites.
Hey, no personal stories. We know way too much about each other.
That's actually this before we even get into 6 and 7 of the rest of Sermon on the Mount. How much as a teacher, I hear this kind of a lot, and I don't know how you guys felt, but being a daily scripture and prophet teacher, right? Daily in their words, and you're telling these teenagers what and how to do certain things, or they're telling each other. And have you ever had that moment of, man, I'm such a hypocrite? Like, do you ever have that moment? I actually hear that from teachers a lot. There's a lot of teachers that are like, I'm telling them stuff I'm still working on. And I think that's okay, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's okay, you're still working on stuff. So when Jesus says,
well, they're not your words, they're the Savior's words. So I'm just teaching you what Jesus said.
Right.
These aren't my words. I'm just teaching you what Jesus said.
So be okay in 6 when he keeps calling you out as a hypocrite. It's okay. We're all there.
Yeah, and I think, look, you got to remember what we get in Scripture is just the smallest fraction of what really went down. Like, what's happening in between those stories? How many times does one of the disciples just put their foot in their mouth, or you know what I mean? Like the Book of Mormon prophets, we go through those prophets so quickly. Like, what's Nephi's problem, right? that persists, and what's Paul's thorn in his side? And I think it, maybe we'll get to the spirit of what Jesus is actually saying right here with hypocrites.
Right.
And
it's probably what we need to define first, is what is he actually saying here? Right.
Yeah.
Well,
it's not, you can't be imperfect and serving the kingdom. It's certainly not that, right?
I like what Adam Miller, he says, in Letters to a Young Mormon, this book that he is basically writing to a younger version of himself, talking about the role of prophets. And we can plug anybody that's a teacher, anybody that's an authority figure in the church, whatever calling that you have. He says this, and I think this is it's just so profound. While it's scary to think that God works through weak, limited, and partial mortals like us, the only thing scarier would be thinking that he doesn't. This rule applies to our own church history. It's a false dilemma to claim that either God works through practically flawless people or God doesn't work at all. The gospel isn't a celebration of God's power to work with the flawless. The gospel is a celebration of God's willingness to work today in our world, in our lives, with people who clearly aren't. To demand that church leaders, past and present, show us only a mask of angelic pseudo-perfection is to deny the gospel's most basic claim, that God's grace works through our weakness. We need prophets, not idols. Our prophets and leaders won't turn out to be who you want them to be. They are not, in fact, even what God might want them to be, but they are real, and God really can nonetheless work through their imperfections to extend his perfect love. Right. I think teachers, we just need to remember that.
Yeah. Well, and I think we need to get this in the proper context. Just because we are working on our own stuff and then telling somebody else, the right way or the optimal way or God's way, does not make you a hypocrite. Because if you're to look in chapter 6 verse 2, there's that really great Greek translation of pretenders or play actors. I think you can have two people who are telling you to do something that they themselves aren't doing or are working on, and one is a hypocrite and one isn't, and it all has to do with the pride behind it. Are you putting yourself forth as a light for people to try to emulate, even though you aren't? I mean, it's all about the heart here. It's emulation, and I think as teachers, we strive to have that humility of, I'm still trying, you're trying, I'm trying, we're all trying.
And again, you get out broader to what he's doing in the Sermon on the Mount. He's not saying, he's not giving a comprehensive list of do's and don'ts, right? He doesn't even do that with the law of Moses. He just says it has been said, right? And then he'll give a commandment, and then he'll teach the spirit of it. It has been said, he'll do that again. What he's doing is he's giving little snapshots of life in the kingdom, what it is to truly live in the kingdom, what it is to truly live as God's people, that can fulfill the covenants that have been made to the fathers. That's what he's doing here. And so again, with 6 and 7, you're going to hear him repeat a phrase again and again: they shall have their reward. And that's one place where Jesus will teach something, and then he'll bring it back to the principle. He'll teach something to bring it back to the principle. And that is, they shall have their reward. People are going to get pretty much what people are looking for. If you pray for using the example that he gives, if you're going to pray so that you can be noticed of others and get some type of status, you're probably going to get that. You know what I mean? It's not, Jesus isn't going to stand in your way of pursuing what you want, but he talks about prayer here. And I love in verse 8, right before the Lord's Prayer, he says, he's like, do not be like the Gentiles. Don't pray like this. Don't worship like this. They're going to have their reward. For your Father knows what things you need before you ask them. And he's essentially, what he's saying is, if you know the character of your Father in heaven, and you're going to pray, and you really want to pray to him, you're not going to pray to some false idol like the Gentiles do, then you have to pray in line with the character of the being you're praying to. Let your knowledge of who God is actually guide the depth of your prayers. And I love that, because he's saying it's similar to other parts in the sermon: be the real thing. Right? Like, if you really want to pray to the Father, you have to pray to the God who knows what you need, who is faithful, who showers grace upon us, who has requirements of us, right, to elevate and serve in his kingdom. And so I think that phrase, you shall have your reward, there's a lot of opportunity for case study in that phrase. And it really, all that grates this generation, this rising generation, on what it is to be religious, I think this hypocrisy element is right at the forefront, right? That there's all this evidence just readily available, past and present, of religions not living up to their ideals. Now, other organizations don't live up to their ideals also. Countries don't, right? And frankly, they do a lot more damage in the world than religions do. But the hypocrisy element of religion seems particularly grating to this rising generation. And so we got to teach, we got to teach Jesus. We can't be teaching religion, right? And so start with that. What do you know about God? What is the character of God? And if we're going to worship him, how can we worship him so that we get the right reward from it, that relationship that we're seeking, and not status or kind of false righteousness or anything like that.
Right. What I like about this, I was doing my own little study on the Sermon on the Mount, and I actually found this other Bible scholar who, before he even jumped into the Sermon on the Mount, he took us to the end of the sermon, and he took us right at the end of chapter 7, and it's verse 28 and 29, where it says, "And when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes." And he kind of focused on the word astonished there, right? And in some of the different translations, that could be amazed. He said the Greek for that word that translates to astonished was actually out of mind. That the sermon that was given just was boom, blowing their minds. Yeah. And so it made me look at 6 and 7 different, where I'm like, all right, so what was we're too familiar with this. I think I said this last week. We're too familiar with this. So what's mind-blowing about this? So in the prayer one that you brought up, Mason, so is that the mind-blowingness of it, is that we just need to have the true nature of God in mind, and that's gonna blow our minds and our prayers? Like, how do you see that?
Well, so this time I love the Lord's Prayer. I think it's one of the most underappreciated set of verses in the church,
In the
not
church,
necessarily in
right?
Christendom, in the
Christianity
church,
loves
right?
it,
Because
right?
yeah. But I love the Lord's Prayer because Jesus is revealing the secret, right? I mean, he says straight up, the goal is thy kingdom come, thy will be done, right? It's not to escape to heaven there, it's to bring heaven here. But this time going through the Lord's Prayer, I wanted to read it kind of with fresh eyes and think about how would I apply this type of prayer in, because I don't just do rote prayers, right? So how do I apply Jesus' teaching? And this is kind of how I read it. My Father in heaven, help me to make your name holy in my life. How can I make your name holy in my life? I've taken your son's name upon me. How can that bring more holiness in my life? What can I do today to bring your kingdom into my relationships, into my family, into my classroom, whatever? Thank you for sustaining me. Help me to be satisfied with the life, with enough so that I can consecrate the rest of it to your kingdom, right? And help me see the roadblocks before I hit them, right? And put those on my radar and give me the humility and courage to choose to follow Christ as opposed to succumbing to my own weakness, right? That something like that. At least as I was looking through it that day, that put me in a new relationship with my Father in heaven, who is astonishing.
I like that.
Right.
I noticed how much, I mean, that just that verse 9, I think we're pretty good at giving thanks in our prayers. How much praise do we give in prayer? I feel like there is a
Right.
difference there, right? I mean, giving thanks is like you're recognizing what God does in your life, and that's totally something we should keep in mind as we're praying. But how much do we give praise, which is much more like recognizing who God is? That was when I had that moment that kind of blew my mind a little bit. But looking at some of these other ones, are there any of these other ones like particularly mind blowing to you, and maybe could be to our teenagers as we teach them? Like, what do you think, Ryan? Is there one that's mind blowing to you that you feel like would be super?
I think in an age where we are so anxiety, mental health, a lot of people, there's just seems like there's just such an increase in this idea of, why take thought for the raiment? Consider the lilies. It was our mom's favorite song. And so this idea of, can we exercise a little bit more faith? I was impressed. So I don't want to invoke too much of The Chosen, but I finally got caught up on the season finale. And the way that the Savior, the way that the actor portrays Christ just begging his disciples to have just a little bit more faith, right? And we're gonna get these moments where it sounds like Jesus is rebuking his disciples, "Oh, ye of little faith." And I wonder if maybe the better way is like, "Oh, you almost had it. You had a little bit of faith. Can you have a little bit more?" And I wonder, the thing that's kind of mind blowing to me is there are so many people that are, and I'm still, even though I've had enough experiences where I've learned to just trust, like, okay, I guess this is just the next trial. This is just the next thing. I'm better at letting the internal panic when, oh, how are we going to pay for this? Or, how are we going to do whatever it is that's causing the panic, the anxiety, maybe the sleepless nights. I feel like I'm getting better at just thinking, consider the lilies. He's, and earlier he talks about the birds in the trees, and just, take not thought for these things. Just, we just focus on my kingdom and just trust that I'm going to take care of the rest.
Yeah, I had this conversation with my two older kids. This was a week or so ago, where we were just talking about some fun missionary stories, and then I told them, I was like, "Hey, did you guys know that missionaries used to get sent out and they literally did the no purse, no script? Like that was not very, that was within, a generation. We used to send missionaries out there and good luck. Like you just go day to day and rely on what the Lord gives you and just go." And I'm like, do you feel like you would be able, I like asking my teenagers, I was like, do you guys feel like you could do that? Do you feel like you'd have enough confidence in it? And their responses were typical teenagers, like, no way. Part of me is like, if we were to like poll the teens, they would probably say no. There's no way that they could do it. But I think they are absolutely capable of this type of faith. But they live in a world that's just like bubble covered, that's trying to keep anybody from feeling even a little bit of discomfort at any point. But boy, there's going to come a time where they're going to have to exercise this type of faith, and just, yeah.
And frankly, they need it right now for the very reasons that Ryan started talking about, just this like this constantly being somewhere else in your mind than right here, dealing with what life is giving you right now, which can be really heavy, right? So, and he says, look, tomorrow's got its own challenges. You leave that for tomorrow, right? Life can be really heavy for our students, and they can absolutely have enough reason to feel burdened in their lives. But just this keeping very clear who it is that cares for us. When Jesus says, I'm the life and the light of the world, that's not hyperbole, right? He's trying to teach us about the true nature of what he does for us. And so I think again and again we can come back to, do we know who we worship? And are we letting that inform how we worship him? How we worship him when we're faced with anxiety, right? And again, I think there's some really good opportunities for conversation there in our class of what does it look like to always remember him when, according to the principles that we're learning here, when we're stressed about life, or we're struggling with all of these things that seem out of our control. What does that look like in your life to always remember him in the very moment that you need him?
And I think we can connect both of those ideas of just the idea that you talked about with prayer, and just in our praising, sometimes the hallowed be thy name, the praising of God, is a good reminder. Just acknowledging, a lot of people say that how great thou art is their favorite hymn. Well, why is that? Well, because it's 100%. Here's all the good things you've given me. And yes, a grateful spirit kind of does that intuitively, but an explicit statement of, God, Father, you're so great because you've given me this and you've given me that, or your power is so great because you control the universe and you control the cosmos, but yet you still know my name. And if we're good at acknowledging that praise aspect, then when it comes time for us to have faith, it's easier to remember, right? Because it becomes we're not only are we praying for that help, but it just becomes part of our daily vernacular. And then there's power in it, right? The faith as a mustard seed to move mountains. becomes a power in and of itself. One of my favorite scriptures is in First Nephi 7, that came at a very, I guess, a very pivotal kind of a crossroads moment of my life, with a pending career change that was happening at a very inconvenient time. This switch for me happened at a time where I had a daughter who was getting ready to go on a mission, a son who was planning to go on a mission, my wife who was going back to college, felt the impression to go back to college, so we got to pay for that, and I'm looking at a potentially 50% pay decrease, and just all of that stress of how are we going to make this work. And in the temple, I just had this thought, you need to study faith. And so I opened a set of scriptures that were there in the celestial room. I went to the topical guide, shout out to the topical guide. I found faith, and this was the second verse listed. And it just, how is it that you have forgotten that the Lord is able to do all things according to his will for the children of men, if it so be that they exercise faith in him? Wherefore, let us be faithful to him. Just remember what he's already done. The greatest condemnation any prophet has had in the Book of Mormon is, you have forgotten the captivity of your fathers.
Right.
Remember him and his greatness and his goodness, and then just trust that if he's done it once, he can do it many, many more times, and he's got you. You're in his hand.
Yeah, we we probably need to finish the conversation, but just the continual mind blowingness for youth, the no man can serve two masters can be a paradigm shift for a teenager, right? Judge not that ye be not judged, but the JST, judge not unrighteously, but judge righteous judgments. The need for discernment and the ability to know between truth and error, like that's a big deal and a big responsibility.
I'd say, the light of your body, right, is your eye. I think there's some stuff there. I love this imagery of the splinter in your brother's eye, right, and the beam in your own, right. That's a really vivid image that, like, I used to even like hold up a pole to my face and then like, start making fun of somebody else. I mean, it's so striking what Jesus is doing here. One thing that I would point out again and again and again, and I would just die on this hill for our students, is in chapter 7, this section 7 through 15, 7 through 12, that the Father gives good gifts. That we got to ask the Father for good gifts, and we fail to do that so often in our worship, to ask for good things, right? And we get so vague in our prayers. Our students are vague in their prayers, and I just have such a witness that the Father wants to give good gifts. We're praying for incredible things out here in our stake in Hawaii. And we just had a general authority or an area authority come and visit our stake conference. And he's like, you know what? I love that you're praying for another stake on the island. I love that you're praying for help from your ancestors and all these things. And he said, why not be praying for another temple? Your Father in heaven loves to give good gifts. And I love that. Why not? Why not? Like, you want to come to know how to receive revelation? Ask for that good gift. You want to come to love family history work? Ask for that. You want to come to love the word of wisdom? Ask for that. You want to have dreams where your ancestors are appearing to you and teaching you? Ask for good gifts. Ask for good things. And your Father in heaven loves to give those things. He knows how to give good gifts. And I think that can be a really, really sacred thing to invite your students to do, because they can go home that night in the secret of their own prayers and have the courage to ask for something that they truly desire, and then get the experience of having their Father in heaven hear them and answer them.
I love it. Okay, it's gonna be a good week. enjoy, spend some time in 6 and 7 and watch how the words of Christ can transform your students.